And we are live. Hey there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about data science and leading data science teams because Sule here has been doing this for a while, especially in the healthcare space. So I wanted to ask him how he does it, how he makes sure his teams actually succeed. Sule, you want to give a quick intro to yourself?
Sure. Yeah. My name's Sule Baptiste. I'm the director of data science at a healthcare company out in New York. We specialize in Medicaid and Medicare insurance. And yeah, I lead a data science team of about 20 data scientists and machine learning engineers supported by our analytics engineers. It's a fun time.
Yeah. When you're not, busy leading 20 data scientists, what do you do for fun?
Ooh. So before this was just like gearing up to get married. So I think that was taking up a lot of my free time. But now that we're on the other side of that, which is so exciting, it's been spending a lot of time. We moved to Denver about 2 years ago, and I think Greater Colorado is still just a massive place to explore. So getting out to the mountains and hiking, we love skiing, going on walks with our dog, exploring the Denver neighborhoods, making new friends out here has been really great. I've actually really gotten into yard work. It's so strange. I never thought that would be me, but I don't know. There's something about chaos to order. Like the lawn is a mess and everything needs to be de-weeded. And so you just like spend 2 to 3 hours and then all of it's just like in order. And it feels so great. So yeah, just little things.
Yeah, I see you two have also bought a house. Yes, I understand that. Maybe it's the fact that it's like the one thing, or not one thing, but it is something you feel like you can control.
Yes.
Like I can control this situation.
Exactly. Yeah. And
where it's like sometimes data is not that way. So
yeah, unruly, out of my control there.
That's too funny. Or just the excuse to come out and like water the lawn for like 30 minutes. I'm like, I'm just gonna go do that and feel like I'm accomplishing something without having to feel like I have to be thinking the entire time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you get into data though? Because I think you've got a pretty I think you were physics background, and then I think biostats might have brought you in, but just curious.
Yeah, I started with physics. I thought I was going to go get a PhD in physics. I had an incredible professor who told me I didn't like lab work enough. I'm so glad that he did, because I probably didn't. But I was always interested in medicine. Didn't want to be, probably couldn't be a doctor. But population health always intrigued me. So went to go get a master's in epidemiology and biostats. I thought I was going to do academic medical research. The pace of research was too slow. A lot of clinical research takes 5, maybe more years to do the study design, actually run the prospective study, and then evaluate it. Put on top of that, you have really not that much data. Most of these studies end up being underpowered, and with like student loans becoming due, I was like looking at the job market and I was like, oh my gosh, all of these insurance companies are looking for people like me. The ACA reform back in, I think, 2011 or so had like collapsed all the risk corridors and changed how you could price risk. And so instead of really pricing to someone's actual risk, they had to price to these much larger pools, which aligns to population health management. And so all of these insurance companies started hiring biostatisticians and the like, because that's pretty much what we do. So that's how I got my foothold into healthcare and insurance. And then ever since, I've just sort of been plotting my way through different types of problems in the healthcare space.
Yeah. So you've been doing, I think, healthcare data, I saw, for like nearly a decade.
Yeah.
What do you like most about kind of working with healthcare data?
Like is a strong word. No, I think, it's the question set, at the end of the day, the crumbs that we're trying to pick up on are about people's health. And when we get it right, when we actually get to summarize the story and evaluate how the things that we're doing work, it's not more eyeballs, nothing against more eyeballs, but it's like actually impacting someone's care or their access to care, things like that. So I think it's that sort of mission that continues to get us excited. And then if you just think about it in terms of like data standpoint, there are just so many different types of data in healthcare, right? You've got volumes and volumes of tabular data that are from all of these sort of structured ontologies and things like that that they use for billing and everything. But then you've got now more and more text data coming on nurses' notes and clinical notes and health records. You've got voice data for all of these different calls that nurses are having with members and that call center are having with members. There's image data if you're in different sides of it. So it just is like, there's just so much and so vast and so messy still and a little too federated. But yeah, there's just a lot of it. And I think that makes for a lot of fun if you're into working with data to solve problems.
I had it wasn't, it was like 2-3 years. So I worked with like insurance data in particular. So that's, you're talking about way deeper data. Like, insurance data is very clean in comparison to notes data. It's like, oh yeah, it's what procedures were done, how much did it cost, whatever. It's pretty easy to kind of track that stuff. You say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting moving from one pair to another is to see how they do it differently. There are standards that you have to adhere to. Like, these are all administrative billing claims. To get paid, you have to put certain codes on that. And so I think from that standpoint, it is really clean. It's better structured than something that isn't as standardized. But I also think like we build models to predict claims payment accuracy, and I think there are like submission errors that then throw wrenches into, is this even a record that for a service that was really rendered or not? And then there are pricing errors, like, is the amount the right amount or did we mispay it? And so while I think that it like looks clean on paper, as you sort of dig in, especially for particular use cases, you see some quirks. And the other part about it, I think, for my team is that it's like such a salivating data set. Like, you have it on anyone who goes and gets a service that we pay for. We have a claim, right? That's the beauty of it. So it's almost ubiquitous in terms of that. But it doesn't tell the whole clinical story. And so, like, yeah, someone has diabetes, but like, where are they on that spectrum? Are they managing their care or not? And so it's really hard to figure that out just from claims. We don't get those detailed. And then, so that's partly the challenges there.
It is all because like you only get it when they went to the doctor. So if they haven't gone to the doctor, I don't know. Hopefully they're managing it. Maybe they've got something that's a prescription that you can kind of track on the pharmaceutical side. Maybe they don't. I think we would have models occasionally that would like predict or try to say like, hey, this person likely has something like diabetes or something based on the other things. Like maybe they weren't fully diagnosed yet. Be like, well, based on the fact that they've gone to the doctor for all of these other things, is probably comorbidity or something. So
that's exactly it. I keep calling it crumbs, but you're just trying to re-piece together what's going on for someone and then put them in contact with the right clinicians or support staff to get the care they need.
So obviously you've gone from kind of being more of the boots on the ground IC to being kind of director, directing 20 people, which is plenty. It's a decent amount. How many people are on the data engineering team actually? So you've got 20 on the ML and DS team, so here on the DE team.
Yeah, we've got a couple. So we've got a big sort of, we call it information management, but a big centralized data team that sort of manages all of our enterprise data. And then each of the analytics teams, sort of a hub and spoke model, have their own dedicated engineers. We have 9 analytics engineers, which is not enough. I wish we had triple that. And for a staff of about 80 analysts, data scientists, and machine learning engineers. So I think that ratio is a little skewed, but they're such a big help. I think they reshape and make a lot of the sort of pre-processing for us so that there's less time. There's still a lot of time spent on data, but less time going and acquiring all the data that we need, more time really digging into the problem we're trying to solve.
No, that makes sense.
I think there are about 100, including contractors, on the larger team for our data engineers.
Wow. Oh, Dang, that's still a solid data engineering team.
Yeah. There's just so much. A lot of it is operational, supporting just like there's a bunch of regulatory things that health insurance companies have to do, and it just takes taking data from where it is and putting it in some other format. And it's still the business is so far behind. A lot of this is like sending flat files through SFTPs and things like that. And so people just have to do it.
Yeah. I have done that.
Yeah.
So going back to the question I was going to ask, and then I was like, oh, I wonder how many data engineers you have. How was the shift essentially from like boots on the ground, being an IC, to kind of manager, director? What were the biggest challenges you kind of faced making that shift?
Yeah, well, I was terrible at it at first. I think, you read stories about individual contributors, sort of performing at a high level for a while, and then they get tapped for being a manager, they accept, and they just are terrible at it. I think I was like literally that. I think the hardest part for me was delegating. On paper, it seems pretty simple, like here's a task, go do it. But all the coaching and mentoring and decomposing of the work, I find myself just trying to do it myself sometimes rather than like trusting the people who are under my management to get it done, or letting them fail gracefully. It took me a good 6 to 12 months to figure it out, like how to actually delegate and then manage expectations about the delegated work. And so for a while there, I think I was doing like my job, parts of their job, not so well. I think my manager at the time had to sit me down and help me through that. So that was one of the bigger challenges. And I think sort of coupling with that was time management. I think I ended up, my hours kept creeping up as I would go from still maintaining some IC work in early management days, and then trying to manage my team. I wasn't effectively managing my own time. And so it was just starting to creep up and up and up every week. And eventually I sort of figured it out, definitely through some mentorship, and then learning to say no, not because I got good at prioritizing, just out of necessity, saying like, okay, we can't actually take on every project. We do need to have bandwidths and backlogs and mechanisms for accepting work. So it was a journey. It's definitely difficult at the beginning.
Yeah. I guess are there any tips you have for anyone who's like either going into management, currently a new manager, that like really you feel like were the most salient points that like this is things we have to do, like to be, or this is things I have to do to just be better at managing?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're not yet and you're thinking about it, try to look for ways to be in leadership that doesn't require you to have a direct manager. So like try to mentor an intern if you guys do internship projects. If you're at a more senior individual contributor level, see if you can mentor more junior staff, and sort of lead their project and go through what it would take to not just be like, hey, come to me if you need help, but also help, take responsibility over that project. So I would say really put yourself in the position, one, to try it on. Not everyone has to manage. Not everyone has to like it. So I think trying it before you figure out like you hate it is always a good idea. If you're already there, I would say seek management training. Not every company provides it, but if your manager is worth their salt, they'll try and put you in either corporate ones, or there are a bunch of the free ones that you can find online, or if you're willing to pay for it, Coursera has some good ones. You're going to think it seems silly. A lot of it is like mundane stuff, but there are always a couple of nuggets in there. And it's really about finding the words to describe some of the challenges that you're facing as a manager, and then just realizing that other people are facing them and they've got techniques and tactics to solve for them. And then I think after that, just starting to feel the joys of like the diversity of your team. Not everyone is the same. And so I think, getting to navigate the different personalities and learn how people work, and then learning how to, make them better will become a lot of fun.
Yeah, that does make sense. I always find like I always feel kind of the same when it comes to certain trainings. Like part of me, I'm like, this kind of feels silly or hokey or whatever you want to call it. And then like eventually you're like, okay, there was like 2 things that were actually very much worth whatever the time was.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's always hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I could get the cliff notes on like, okay, no, of these 10 things, like which one am I actually going to use? But I think with every single one I've done, I've taken something away. Whether it's like resolving conflict or fostering healthy tension, trying to find stretch projects for people, those kind of things. Yeah, so I would advise looking for management training if it's offered.
Makes sense. So then, like shifting over to like not just the switch, but like actually running projects. Do you have any like favorite projects that your team's kind of been taking on or that you've helped manage?
Yeah. My favorite projects. I think the ones that I gravitate towards are the clinical ones. At least that was earlier in my career. The ones where we're predicting some adverse event or some clinical need, and then getting it right. So putting them in contact with the right people to actually make some corrective action or take some behavior change. When you go and evaluate those programs like reductions in readmissions, which means people just aren't going back to the hospital. That's great, right? Those are really rewarding. And I think that was really what I sort of sharpened my teeth on earlier in my career. So any of those I would have said prior, but of late, I think the ones that I'm really enjoying, as you to broaden your scope out of just the clinical operations, are sort of employee enablement, I guess I'll call it, right? So as I work with all of these teams working on legacy systems, it's really fun to work with them and understand what they're trying to do and help automate or accelerate it so that they can spend more time doing all of the other stuff they can't get to. Like we've got a lot of people who read notes, for instance, right? And they have to summarize those notes and then, put certain details in other workflows. That's perfect for NLP, right? And so getting to work with them and doing that, and then seeing them like their minds explode a little bit, but then also just they're so delighted by it. They're so thankful for the help. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, these are people who are exceptional at their jobs. They're clinicians. They understand what people need, and they have more time to go do other things. And so that's really been exciting. And I think the last one we'll see is like system quality. I think we've started to look at our transactional systems and make sure that they're working as intended as we use more ML within them, almost as an audit. And I think it's starting to bear some fruit in terms of finding errors faster. And really thinking about how we like instrument the platform so that we can actually see the issues. So that's been a new one or a newer one that I'm starting to really enjoy. But yeah, I think the breadth of problems is also just refreshing that it's never just one thing.
Yeah, it's not. So on the what was I just thinking? So it feels like you've shifted more from like maybe the pure science to also maybe even like more bigger picture kind of projects that you really see the value in. Is that kind of what I think maybe you enjoy about it? Or
yeah, I mean, I think definitely. I think before I joined this last place, I was largely sort of within one vertical, working on lots of different problems, but within one space. And so now having scope over a lot more things, I'm seeing the elegance and beauty in some of the solutions that we can do, and things that like customer retention wouldn't have been something I would have been like, yeah, I'm so jazzed about it. But it is interesting to see like those insights and like why people are leaving and how do we get them back. And some of it's some really good gripes. I mean, people have some real good reasons not to be with us. And so if you identify those, it actually is sort of helping make us better. And that is a nice little nugget. Like I wasn't expecting it. Oh yeah, retention can be fun. It's just like everything else.
That's funny. That's very, very funny. More just because I'm curious. Do you feel like any of your schooling background, whether it was physics or biostats, plays a role in that, or is that stuff that you don't feel like you lean into as much anymore?
The epi definitely plays a role. I think study design and thinking through how you generate hypotheses and then test them is definitely something I use a lot. right? Like test and
Yeah.
learning is something we talk about. We probably don't do enough of it, but like experimenting really is key, and having that mentality. The physics, I go back and forth. A lot of it is about systems, and sort of organizing things into systems. And a lot of systems thinking is the way I think about our job. How do we organize a bunch of disparate things into systems? And so I think I take a lot of that into our work. I don't love doing a bunch of one-offs, though everyone who's in this field knows that you have to every once in a while. But organizing all of these different things into, different data systems, different infrastructures that support multiple things and scale has really been nice. But I don't have a CS background, so it's not definitely something I think I've probably learned more on the job than school. Yeah.
I feel like that's the case with a lot of CS. It's like even the people that had like a computer engineering or computer science degree, it's like I still ended up having to learn most of it on the job. Like besides data structure and algorithms, it's like everything else is like, was it useful?
Yeah, definitely not using like my optics class. So
yeah, exactly. Actually, I think you brought this up earlier, but I'm curious. So how do you kind of like set up your team or the data team in general? Is it like embedded? Is it centralized? Like how have you guys kind of organized it?
Yeah, so we've got a hub that will eventually become a spoke. So we're a maturing data science function. I think data science hires, one was 5 years ago. We really grew to our current size about a year ago. So we're starting to incubate people as sort of generalists as we start to figure out what kind of systems and infrastructure support they need. And then we'll start embedding them within specific verticals. I think we're starting with clinical because that one's pretty far along. We'll do sales and customer next. So we have data scientists that then work with our analysts. And then there's usually a product manager, as well as sort of a business contact that makes a pod on a lot of the projects. We have machine learning engineers that they hand that off to in terms of like deployment, and they sort of manage those deployments once they're out. And then we have outside of our ecosystem, but within IT, DevOps and cloud systems engineering support, and then that broader data engineering group. If there's sort of any automation that needs to happen on we're on AWS, one of our VPCs that's not ours. So I think it's a good evolving model. We could probably use a couple more skill sets. Like if we're building a front end, we have to go work with our front end teams because we don't have that specific skill on our current team. But yeah, it's evolving. We operate within sort of like a modified Scrum. We work on 3-week sprints and PIs, and have backlogs that we grew.
It never stopped growing.
It literally never stops growing. We have been getting better at getting a couple of things off of it, just like no one needs this anymore. But yeah, it is growing.
Yeah. Are there anything like, do you feel like there are certain things that really work in terms of like processes and in making sure that like projects go from start to finish correctly, or like in a way that everyone feels like, okay, this is over now, like we can move on to the next thing?
Yeah. I've definitely seen them work. I won't lie to you and say all of ours are in that state. It's really when you spend, a lot of time on project initiation, really understanding the business question, how to turn it into a data science question, and then contending with like the operational reality of putting it out there on set. In the rare cases that we're allowed to do that, it's the most satisfying projects for everyone, right? Yeah. Like everyone is clear on what we're trying to solve. They're aligned. The engineers know, the data scientists know, the analysts know, we know. And so like when people are making decisions on how to design, we're all aligned. I think the other ones that are sort of like escalated requests, we don't have enough to try and figure out. We just start going, you start these compounding decision debt throughout the project. You have to pivot, you got to change, you take shortcuts. Those are the ones that you're like, this is just like a nightmare. So it's the ones where we really spend the time on project initiation, asking the right questions as to like, why are we working on this? And we have a couple stakeholders in one of our verticals that as we've started to actually deliver the things that they want, they're willing to sit there with us and really project initiate.
Yeah.
Those are our best. So I think the goal is to get all of the other verticals there eventually.
Yeah, I think so. I think I haven't heard this term before. Heard tech debt, heard plenty of other debts, decision debt. I think I like that.
Yeah, underthinking decisions. It comes back to haunt you.
Yeah. Where did you pick that up? Working where you're at, or where did that come from?
Yeah, someone was talking about it here, and then they picked up on LinkedIn, but it really resonated, just because I think we talk about tech debt and systems that we make, but I see it, especially at like my level, if a lot of what we're doing is decision support, and if we're making really bad or sort of underthought or myopic decisions, we're just pushing this down the road in terms of something that we have to fix later. Yeah, and it compounds really fast. So it was a nice analogy. I was like, okay, yeah, don't underthink things, don't overthink things, but yeah, you can definitely have some decision debt.
I don't know, it makes sense. Yeah, especially since your decisions, unlike maybe an engineer's decision, which yes, obviously compounds in its own way, but like generally in a very small scope. Your decisions, like especially if it's coming from like the CEO or something, and then keeps going down and down, right? It just impacts such a large number of people.
Yeah, like project selection, or like, hey, we're just going to do it this way instead of really thinking about an optimal solution for it, and then yeah, it just goes from there.
Yeah. So again, you guys kind of partner, like talking more about like team organization. You partner with it sounds like the data engineering team. You don't lead it, right? Like that's like a separate team, right?
Yeah.
Is there any tips you have for data engineering teams trying to work with data science teams?
Well, first, thank you to the data engineers out there. You're doing God's work. I really do believe it. I think I've gotten a newfound appreciation for just how hard good data engineering is. I think, and this really sort of translates to anyone, but if you think about like customer-centric design, I guess probably a buzzword, but understanding what the teams that you're working with build and why they build them is always important. So if there's any way for you to cross-train, whether it's shadow, whether it's refactor something, whether it's build it, a simple model yourself, I think it does go a lot of way for people to just understand like, what are they building? Why did they build it? Like, why do they even ask me for data from here to there? Right? What's the problem they're trying to solve? Because then it just gives you a bunch of insight into some of the decisions you can make, some of the improvements that you can offer in helping them. So that would be one. I would say two, we've been working with one of our leaders of data engineering. Don't be afraid to ask for more requirements. We're notorious for not giving good enough requirements. But when you do, right, as you raise that bar in terms of like, hey, the requirements need to be better, let's also raise the floor and make it easier to get requirements, right? So give us templates, give us like guidance on how you want the requirements to look, not just saying like, hey, this isn't sufficient. And so that collaboration and that trust and building that with your peers is great, right? Like I'm all for it. I want it to be what you want and make it super easy. But if I don't know what you want, it's hard to give it to you. And so then it becomes this back and forth. So I'm blessed to work with some people who get that, and they give us templates, and it's like, okay, great, we can fill this out. And then it's on me to just say like, hey, if you put it in this format, they'll do it really fast. Everyone wins.
It sounds like you need requirements for your requirements. Look, just tell us. No, that makes sense. Do you ever feel like it'd make more sense to have kind of data teams be more full stack? Do you kind of feel like it makes sense to have them kind of broken down by specialization? Any thoughts there?
Ooh, yeah. I mean, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. I think we've been thinking about just like engineering, not just data engineering. So you got your data engineers, your ML engineers, your ML ops engineers, now DevOps engineers, cloud systems engineers. I do think we're getting to a point where at some organizations, it's going to be much more of a requirement that you're full stack. You're just like a jack of all trades wearing multiple hats, just especially how you can staff. I think we're probably right now big enough to specialize a bit. We just have so much of every single thing that it would be helpful to have some specialization. I wish we did have like a bench of generalists though, because there's never enough engineering somewhere. So yeah, I think it depends on the organization, the products you're building, but there's a space for both. And then again, sort of going back to the cross training, I think increasingly, people who started as DBAs and sort of moving into it are going to need to know varied skills. Data scientists are going to need to get better at data engineering. I think we're all going to be sort of starting to do that T-shaped skill set.
Yeah, that makes sense. It feels like most people are having to do some level of that, even when you want to be like, I just do data science. It's like, well, you're the first data hire, so you do all of it.
You're doing all of it. Yeah, exactly.
You're also setting up Snowflake or Databricks or whatever you're on.
Yeah.
So on. Yeah. But hey, maybe with this next question, maybe LLMs will make it easier. But do you have any thoughts on LLMs and where they fit into the data world?
Yeah. I feel like I can't get out of a week these days without being asked like, hey, how are we going to integrate this into XYZ? No, I think jokes aside, it's such an exciting technology. I think as a personal consumer, every time I interact with ChatGPT or its competitors, I'm just blown away by what's there. I think we're a bit away from enterprise grade systems that consume them, but I don't want to look foolish and say we're 10 years. It's something south of that. I've been trying to think, like, struggling with, but trying to think through, how do I think about it, right? Like, how do I put my team in the right place as new technology disrupts? I think for individuals, if you're not squarely on the team building it, it's probably time to go take a class and inform yourselves on just like the core topics related to them. For teams, if you're not building it, it's probably time to start looking at it in terms of productivity tools. Go talk to your CISO, your security officer, and get it approved, because it is proving out to be a really helpful development tool for data teams. I think at an enterprise level, I would say if you're in a sector that's risk tolerant enough or the stakes are low enough, you should definitely be doing some pilots. I think healthcare is going to be tricky. It's a super disparate system, a lot of entrenched players that don't want to share data, and a lot of legacy applications that don't play nice with these. And so it'll be interesting to see where it disrupts, but it's here to stay. It's another tool in the toolkit. And I think if you want to stay current, you're going to need to start thinking about it. I will not say, though, that like I feel like I see all of these things on LinkedIn or Twitter or X, I guess we're calling it now, that are like, yeah, if you're not using this, you've already lost. Like, that's not quite true. Like, you could start tomorrow, you can start in a little bit, you'll be just fine. But I do think you should start thinking about it.
Yeah. I mean, as you kind of brought up, like most companies will, especially if their enterprises are going to take time to even like adopt the productivity version tools of these things, like, oh yeah, how do we, make sure we use Copilot in a way that doesn't take that data and then inject it somewhere else, where now someone else has access to our AWS keys or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think a lot of companies struggle with this, and a lot of well-intentioned people might do the wrong thing. So I think a lot of companies will slow roll it. A lot of companies are going really fast, though.
It's always weird when you see that too. You're like, wow, you're adopting this considerably fast. I mean, maybe it's just because they feel like they missed out on all the other boats, which I don't even think is true. It's like there are plenty of companies still setting up basic data warehouses. There's no one's behind, I think, as much as they feel they are.
Yeah, I think it's, when you go into conferences or looking around, people are talking about it, you may feel that, but when you look under the hood, you're completely right. Like, we have databases that couldn't interact with these systems if we wanted them to. And so we're just not in the state to be an LLM first company. I don't know many that sort of are.
Yeah. It's like unless you're just a startup, it's really hard to just take it and be like, all right, let's do LLM now and make that part of our strategy.
Yeah, but it is super exciting. Oscar Health just put out a sort of position on generative AI, and I think it resonates with me. Just the way that they're thinking about collaborating with competitors, sort of transparency where you can, and then really thinking through the ethical parts. We were just coming around on sort of AI ethics and responsible AI as it pertains to ML development, which I guess is traditional ML development. And now this is a completely different set of criteria that we've got to think about. So I think as you adopt it, you got to think about being both secure and just like ethical. I think there are going to be winners and losers in the market and in society, and it has a lot of benefits that it can give us, but there are also some pitfalls that we may fall into if we don't stop.
Yeah, and we won't see them until 5 years from now, and
exactly.
10 years from now, which is the harder thing. It's like,
yeah,
you just never know until it's again down the line. You're like, oh yeah, that wasn't maybe the best decision, but it seemed great.
Yeah, at the time, low risk, low stakes.
Yeah. Speaking of a few years out, I won't ask you for 10 years, but 5 years. Any thoughts of what's going on in 5 years in the data world? Any bets?
Oh boy. Well, I spent most of my time in healthcare, so I'll probably make my bets there. I will be watching regulation in healthcare. I think if you work in healthcare, that's something to keep an eye on. For people who work on data availability and standardization, they call it interoperability or FHIR, has always been sort of this like mecca of we'll have all of the data on everyone. And that sounds sort of dystopian when you say that out loud like that, but it is such a fragmented system that like if you go to one hospital and you go to another, that data is not in the same place, right? And so once you have these standardized APIs, a whole bunch of new applications become possible for data teams, right? Things that we just don't build, we don't have it on enough people. So I think that if policy catches up and there's some teeth behind actually making it easier for consumers to access their data and make it available to the companies that they want, we're going to see a lot of benefits, whether it's LLMs or not, in terms of the systems that we can build on top of it. So I think that happens in the next couple of years. It's probably closer to 3 to 5 than it is 1 to 3, but that would be huge. I think you're going to see large language models in employee-facing apps very soon, and then maybe some consumer-facing apps thereafter. We'll see on that one. I think you're going to see the emergence of new job descriptions. I think prompt engineer might be a new sort of field of engineering at some point, as more and more people need that. I think we're already on this one, so this isn't like really that much of a 5-year, but I think people are going to realize the value of good data. I think we've been, even me, like we've been just hyping like, oh, the algorithms are so great, the data scientists are the best, but like I think we're really getting to a sense of like the data really needs to be really good. I'll give you an example. So we're working on a chatbot assistant, and like really didn't take that long for the company we're working with to stand it up. But the reality was that the documents that it was supposed to consume weren't very good. And so its responses weren't really good. And it wasn't because of the system, it's because their data wasn't in the place. So we actually had to go and sort of rewrite the knowledge documents to be better. I think people are going to start to realize that like the data is so important as well, not just all of these sort of fancy new tools.
Yeah. I mean, like even when you were talking about like the interoperability, like that's not fancy. It's something that you're like, this shouldn't be hard. I mean, it's hard from the standpoint of like getting people to talk to each other and like agree on what that looks like. That's very hard. But in terms of like technically, it's like this is technically an easy thing once we deal with the people side.
Yeah, I mean, I think the technology has been there for at least a decade, right? But getting the alignment of the healthcare delivery system to use that technology and incentives to sort of share data has just never been there.
Yeah, it's very funny. Like that was something that, again, the company I worked for, like we did it more from a standpoint of like analytics and again insurance claim data, and we would be able to like track if like you switch insurance providers because right, like we have your SSN, we can kind of tell who you are, and that's something that like great, like the insurance providers can't tell, but we would be able to be like, oh no, we can track this person throughout their history because we know it. But that information, again, until you get merged together and bought out, you guys don't actually know. Like, I don't know who's over. What happened to John? I don't know.
I mean, when people leave, we just get a notification from the state that they left. We don't know where they went, and so it's those kind of things where, is that as more really good data becomes available to us, a lot of things become possible.
Yeah. Okay, the last question I usually ask everyone, which I think is more geared towards people, especially in the data engineering space, but I'm sure data science has their fair share of these as well. Are there any terms that like exist currently that you wish currently or don't exist anymore, essentially?
Oh, like terms that I hear right now that I wish just didn't exist.
Yeah.
Ooh. I don't know. Sometimes we call it word allergies. Like people have like word allergies to things. Like they're just like this. Just stop talking about that. I don't have any in particular. I do think there's some things that we overuse. For instance, product. I actually think product is a useful term, but we're calling everything a product. Not everything is a product or needs to be a product. And I do like the product mindset, but I think sometimes we get trapped in it, and we sort of lose sight of being like bringing value because we're like, well, this is a product and needs all of these different things, the trappings of being a product. And like, no, it's actually just a quick hit. Like we just need to get this out and then go actually focus on our products and product development. And so I think maybe the overuse of product has been something that's on there a lot. I think I have a love-hate relationship with Scrum. Sometimes I just think about it as like a metronome. It's just like tick, tick, tick. That it keeps going, and it has a purpose, right? It keeps people, on a cadence, but in that sort of extended metronome metaphor, it's not creating the music, right? Like you got to have like coordination amongst all of these different teams to be playing the same sheet music, and Scrum itself is just a metronome. And so I think sometimes people just over rely on it and saying, well, this is like my North Star. And it's a mechanism. But no, I don't know if I've got any other terms right now. I think if you'd asked me like around February, I probably would have said large language model. It was just everywhere. But I think that's settled down. I guess one other is, and I think this is probably me having to just help some of my stakeholders with some data literacy. Not everything is a prediction. I think there are some really good just business rules, and we apply them all the time. But everything feels like, we just got to predict this, predict that, and it's like, well, we don't actually need to. Like, there's a pretty good signal with this rule and that outcome, and let's just apply that.
Yeah, the example I often use or personally use there is FizzBuzz. I don't know if do you know FizzBuzz by chance? No. It's like a basic programming question that they'll ask you when you're interviewing. But it's also a game. It's also like a childhood game. You go around, you count like 1, 2, 3, and when you say like a number that's divisible by 3, so or 5, basically 1. If it's 3, you say fizz. If it's 5, you say buzz. If it's both, it's FizzBuzz. So yeah, so 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2 fizz,
Yeah.
4 buzz, etc. And so you basically the question is like create a system that
does
that. Well, it's like, okay, well, you could set up an ML model to like get data.
Exactly.
Go and do it. It probably wouldn't be as right, or you just set up the basic logic because it really is just basic logic, and that's usually
yeah. I mean, it's so good. It's such a yeah. Not everything needs to be a machine learning model.
Yeah. But it sounds cooler.
Mm-hmm. We're using AI, right? And so I think that's you got to bottle up that excitement and sort of steer it to the right solutions. You know, I don't want to just tell people like you're crazy, stop asking me. But yeah, not everything needs to be a machine learning model.
Yeah, it's funny. I've definitely had some of those conversations recently where I'm like, I'm pretty sure this could just be some logic.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure. And I'm pretty sure you don't want an ML model doing this also.
Yeah.
We do have at least one question, but if anyone else has other questions, please do feel free to ask. So Matthew's asking, for someone coming from an analytics background or engineering background looking to switch into data science, what are you looking for as a manager, and what skills overlap versus what needs to be developed?
It's a really good question. So the stuff that isn't really sort of specific to the field, I always look for is passion, curiosity, and sort of learning mindset, because you're going to need it. But both fields are changing, so if you're not passionate about it and willing to learn, you're going to fall behind. So that's just a skill overlap. For data science these days, you probably have most of the programming and understanding of database or data structures rather. I think what I see is, I think people may say just like go learn ML, like go apply, go Kaggle, and just like read a notebook. I think I'm going to start with maybe just like basics around data analysis, right? Like, how do you understand the business question? How do you ask data-oriented questions to answer it? That then sort of evolve from reporting and descriptives to advanced analytics to data science. And then you'll slowly start to understand like why you would even want to know most of the things that sort of fall on data science teams' laps. If you're starting now, so I'd start with like basics around data analysis. If you already have that, but then I'd start to go into applied ML. I guess I got to start being more specific about like what's in there. Well, it depends on the job, but let's say you're going for a machine learning team. I would go and applied ML and start to learn some of the like gradient boosted techniques. I want you to skip some of the other ones, but really that is the darling of the day and going to be necessary. After that, I think I would, I think what we've been asking people to do, work on explaining and understanding how it worked. A lot of data scientists are increasingly stakeholder facing and don't need to just build the systems, but then help their stakeholders use them. I see a lot of gap in that last mile of people just trying to say, okay, I built this thing, it's a rocket ship, but I don't have anyone who can use it. How do I align it to what they're trying to understand? And so being able to explain what you've done, how it answers the problem, is like a really good skill. And if you don't want to take a boot camp and you don't want to go back to school, I do think there are a lot of really good free or not too expensive courses that you can take on any of these sort of massive online platforms like Coursera or others.
Yeah, no, there's definitely tons of options. I do think the one thing that you've kind of brought up a few times now is like translating kind of like what the business is asking, and like the data science kind of side of it. Like, how do you kind of maybe like explain that to people or help people kind of understand what they're trying to do there? Where it's like, okay, the business asks this. This is how you kind of translate it into our side, and then almost feed it back to them essentially.
Yeah. Evolving, trying to figure out just how do you get that mindset to scale. I mean, I got a question literally this morning, just looking for data, and both me and one of the other directors, our gut response was, what is your objective? Like, if I get this right, what are you trying to achieve? How would you measure it, right? And it's those type of questions of like, what exactly do you want to do? What corrective action are you going to take to do it? And then I can start to figure out if I can build you a system that you could even use to do that. Because a lot of times we've got these really great questions, but then there's no corrective action. Like, there's nothing in the world that the company that you're at has to impact that thing. Yeah. That's not a good problem for us to solve. Like, we've got to go find a lever to take. Or there is a lever, but I don't have any signal in the data that I have to do it. And that's not a really good one either. So I think sometimes we get lost in like, because we can build it and you can pretty much try and predict anything. I don't know why you would, but like you can create classification algorithm just around anything, just binary class it and go. But not a lot of those then end up being used, and a lot of them get shelved. And so I think what we're trying to make sure is that like the amount of things that we make that get used goes up. And it's really around understanding what are the objectives of your business stakeholders or your product owners or those kind of things. And then asking a lot of user research questions. And that goes back to that project initiation. Like, if you get to do that, and you don't always get to do it, but if you do, and you really get to sit with them and understand how their workflows work, what their operational challenges are, what they're trying to achieve, how long it's going to take, how they'll measure it, then you can go, okay, let's take this back and design a solution for it. Yeah. You don't always have that luxury. You know, I've definitely been on teams where like you just get thrust into the middle of something that's a multi-year project and you're just doing it, you know, and that's going to happen too.
Yeah. No. I think, I don't know. I think that's always just the kind of like just misstep sometimes, because we just get into the like, oh, what's someone asks a question and like your engineering brain or whatever part of your brain goes off and you're like, okay, I know you already see the solution and you're not thinking where it's going.
Yeah.
You're just like, I see the solution, so I'm gonna go do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are lots of great solutions that just never really get used because they're not actually solving the problem. Yeah. That's a tough place.
I like that point you brought up. Like, what is success? Like, what is the outcome of this actually look like? Not just like, I think that's a good question to ask. Okay, so here's a question: how is the application of data science in healthcare different from other industries like tech?
Well, for tech specifically, I think we're probably a lagging adopter. I think we're seeing what tech companies do, and so translating it to our use cases. It's probably healthcare is probably more regulated than most, especially with HIPAA and just the sensitivity of the data. I think the financial sector is probably there too, but we really need to be careful in terms of what data we use, what data we expose, and there are some pretty hefty fines in not doing this. I think that's always a question. I would say, how else is it different? So, I think what's interesting is if you take the clinical stuff out, a lot of it is the same, right? Like, you want to keep your customers, you want your transactional systems to work, you want to forecast spend, those kind of things. That is the same amongst a lot of different companies. So I think it's a lot of transferable skills. I think the clinical side is its own beast. I think a lot of other companies, like tech companies, are working off of consumer behavior, trying to steer it, understand it, predict it. Behavioral science is a huge component of that. Disease isn't necessarily always behavior driven. I think the pathology of your disease might happen regardless of your best intentions, right? You might be taking great care of yourself. And so that is an additional quirk in just like the problem. And so sometimes we ask our data scientists that work on those to be clinical researchers first and data scientists second, really understanding the underlying mechanisms of the disease, not just like, can you find some features to predict something? Which you can always do that, but then there are a bunch of spurious and uninformative features in your model that don't help anyone. So I think that's a part of it. What else would I say? Healthcare versus tech. I don't work on image as much. Health insurance companies don't really have a lot of radiology, but I imagine that's a really interesting field right now in terms of just what they're doing with radiology data and confirming diseases through it. I think it's probably a little bit different than other applications of it because it is so diagnostic and like high stakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably like the part of your answer, right? Like it's like healthcare is just higher stakes.
Yeah. I mean, these are people's health, and so you want to make sure you get it right. So your optimization criteria on a lot of these are a little bit different too.
Yeah. I was like, I say that, but I guess we found that like sometimes that's not always the case. Sometimes there are high stakes in social media and YouTube streaming or video streaming systems. Sometimes there are high stakes, and we didn't realize that. Information can also be an interesting pathology. Like how we adopt it and use it is interesting. I remember seeing like epidemiological studies of like information transfer because it's like oddly similar in like spreading the news. So it's like, oh.
Those never really gotten to explore, but like vector models, just of like things propagating through space.
Yeah. So it's a good question though. Yeah. I feel like as being someone who worked a few years in tech, but yeah, it's the same problems to a degree. Even some of like the solutions in like ways you're solving problems, like it's like fraud detection. It's like it's kind of similar, right? Like you're looking for similar characteristics, abnormal behaviors, things that don't seem right. Earlier I think you brought up like with like claims, like trying to find those ones that look weird. I mean, it's not that different, right? No. Like, this is weird.
Yeah, and a lot of it is us, because we're lagging, it is poaching a lot of techniques that we see, right? Like we're reading, other published research or archive papers that are coming from different sectors and going, oh, okay, I think we could try that. Yeah. I think we saw something recently. We're really into trying this. I don't know, causal. Everyone wants to know why. These are not causal systems, and so causal ML keeps coming up. So like, I think econ was championing counterfactual Shapley values. Like, okay, well, let's try that. So a lot of poaching.
Did it work?
Still trying to figure it out. I think a lot of it has to do with like the background that you select. It's a lot. It's not as out of the box as we thought it would be. So it's still TBD. I'll report back.
Awesome. Well, I'll be mindful of your time. It is 9, so I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts, Sule, before we sign off?
Yeah, just one. I mean, I think it seems like your audience is a broad spectrum of data practitioners. I would just say to all data engineers out there, thank you for bearing with us, and it's exciting. I think data engineering in particular will be one of the most sought after roles in the next couple of years. So I'm excited to partner with really, really great ones.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing so much about managing data science teams. I'm sure I'm looking forward to seeing where you're going with that. And thanks so much again.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to hit end broadcast.